I would say that regardless of external pressure, however you think your family or your loved ones or people, what they think about you, you might think they all want you to be a doctor or a surgeon or an astronaut. But what they actually want for you is to be happy. And therefore, I would say, if you can, pursue your dreams. That would be the one thing.
Welcome back to the pod, everyone. We've got a slightly different episode of the Collatus for you today. I'm pretty sure that most of you that are here will have read the episode description, and as soon as it said science fiction, it probably had a bit of a filtering effect. Half of you probably decided not to listen, so you're not here anyway, but half of you decided to tune in, because that's the weird thing about science fiction, is that it is a great filter. It's strange. Sometimes within in our intel and police communities, we have people who won't even tolerate fiction, let alone science fiction. Bye-bye Shakespeare. But there are people with our community that do tolerate science fiction and appreciate science fiction. And we're going to try and make the argument today for why science fiction and even comics are not only a source of entertainment, but actually critical tools for critical thinking and really important. And to help us do that, you know what we'd like on the Collatus, we try and get the best experts we can. We are very lucky to have Ian Jackson, possibly one of the most knowledgeable comic and science fiction people that I've ever met, and we are phenomenally lucky to have him on the show today. So, Ian, would you like to introduce yourself to the crew and say hello?
Hello, everyone. You're very kind to say such things. That's very kind. Hello, I'm Ian. I run a one-man, I call it a geekery, but I run basically a one-man comic shop in a fairly small town in Derbyshire, and I've done it full time for about 6.5 years. I moved up to Wordsworth 6 months ago, and I've had a journey, but because of that journey, it's helped me develop a somewhat small social media following, and that has helped me survive as a business. And so, yeah, I'm hugely grateful for that.
But you weren't always into comics, right?
Well, I've always been into comics.
Sorry, I mean, as in for big commercially.
As a
sorry,
business.
Yeah.
No, I've done many different things. I've worked in travel. I've been an archaeologist. I've worked in theatre. I've worked. My first degree was a performance degree. I was an actor when I was younger. And I worked as an art handler, moving multi-million pound items around for quite a long time. And then I was ill with stress, and then I thought, what do I really know about? I actually really know about Blake Seven and Batman. I don't actually know it. The big difference in what I'd learned and what I really knew about, and what I really knew about was obscure science fiction and comic books.
Nothing wrong with that. I think so. The theme for this episode is we're going to try and make the case for both sci-fi and comics. I believe. Let's start with comics first, and we'll go into sci-fi. I think towards the back end. I believe there's quite a few studies now that show that comics actually utilize more of the brain during processing than purely text reading or visual audio processing of video. So you actually basically have to use different parts of your brain as you process. So I think with that in mind, I guess you talk to people all the time about comics and you deal with a variety of customers. What's your take on, are comics still important? Are they something that belong in the past, or are they here to stay? Do you think they've got a future?
I completely think it's still a massively popular medium. So really, if we're talking about sort of superhero comics as we imagine them today, we are approaching 100 years of that. So the industry and the whole themes have seen enormous peaks and troughs over the years. We've been through Second World War. There's so many things have happened. So Superman, I think I'm right, it's 1938, and then you got Wonder Woman. Captain America was specifically a Second World War character. So we've seen huge peaks and troughs over the years in popularity. Comics have changed a huge amount, and I'm sure they will continue to do so. Like any kind of commercial medium, if one thing fails, we'll try something else. Western comics is a great example. So, Wild West comics used to be massive, used to sell millions of copies. Now, basically none exist. But other things have come about to take their place. I'm very aware in the shop because I sort of know about my little niche, which is, old American comics and some other things. I'm not very good at super modern stuff. So manga, for example, I meet so many young people that are hugely passionate about manga, and my knowledge of it is very small. And so I'm really seeing, it's a really interesting thing, how generations find their moniker, they find their thing that makes them different, their punk rock, their rave culture, whatever it is. So Japanese subculture has hit an entire generation, which was seeping in the sort of Transformers in the 80s, but has really hit hard now. So you can see comic books reinventing themselves through a form that generation finds its sense of identity. So, however cool I think I am, the truth is kids are like, yeah, I'm not into old American comics because the sad old men are into it. I'm into like crazy horror manga because the adults don't like that. And that gives them that sense of identity, as it did for my generation in the 70s, 80s, as it did for you guys, whenever, going all the way back to the 30s. So for my opinion, it will merely change and shift. The medium may change. Personally, I mean, it's what I do is 90% nostalgia, right? The type of stuff that I sell, I don't sell new things. I sell really old things that people are like, oh my God, that's the one I had when I was a kid. That's what I do. I sell history. I sell nostalgia, basically. So that's a different sort of thing. It's not like modern, it's not like the comics that are coming out now. I think what you said about it being prohibitively expensive, it is a problem. And in my mind, so no disrespect to anybody else's business, right? There are reasons why people do everything, but I go into like the newsagents near me and they sell the Beano. And, it's marked on the cover price. And I thought, oh, I wonder how much the Beano is now. And it was £4.95p. And I was like, no, I'm not saying this is, but I've got 60-year-old stuff in my shop that's less than that. Like, how can a modern comic be a £5? And they come out every week. So what? That's 20 quid a week, 20 quid a month for a parent. That's a lot of money to find. That's crazy. And that's why it's gone. The Beano has gone from, at its peak, selling more copies in the UK than there were children in the UK to 30,000 copies a week. And that is the problem with that, in my opinion. It's become unaffordable. But then also passions and styles change. The Beano is not fashionable. It is not cool, right? And it won't be. They've tried. It's very sanitized. There's no Lord Snooty. There's no getting hit with a slipper. That's all gone. Now, in my opinion, I have a box of old Beanos in the back that I effectively give away to nice kids because they like the old stuff because it's a bit edgy. It's like, oh yeah, that's a bit, there's nothing like awful racist or anything in it, but I guess there could be more female characters. There could be a bit more diversity within it, but it's of its time. But I find young kids, 6, 7, 8 years old, actually really like it because it's different rather than the ultra sanitized version that it is today. But saying that, I've just read I don't come across modern comics, but someone lent me Absolute Batman, which is just sort of come out in the last year and a half. And that is absolutely phenomenal. I know it's been hugely popular. So I think that's maybe just that one comic is going to bring the comic scene back because it's gone massive. And so I totally, for me, it's a market that's always peaked and troughed, but I can't see it collapsing completely. It's become a more niche area thing, sadly.
So do you think it's going to move into more like graphic novel compendium type territory rather than
people have been talking about that for a long time. I think I remember Alan Moore many years ago, kind of Watchmen era, sort of saying that was, the comics were going to die and that it were going to become just trade paperbacks, graphic novels. But for me, I've got loads of graphic novels in the shop. I don't sell many. I actually sell more old comics because what's scary for me is that in my head, a comic that's from 1994 is not very long ago. But if you are 15 years old and you come in and you go, wow, that's a near mint. How long ago is 1995? Oh, right. It's 30 years old. It's hard for me to place that because when I was a kid, if I found a comic from the 60s, that seemed like ancient. And that was in like 1982. But now, if I found a comic from 1982, that's much older than the equivalent was when I was little, right? So that's nice for me because I think that's just more exciting. It's just more interesting, right? So I do okay at that. That's more my little angle, right? But I think that's to do with my very specific business.
Comics don't seem to be mainstream as in
No.
for kids.
No.
I think that's the weird entry point, isn't it? Is that I think we all grew up on this call.
Yeah,
Reading comics as a starting point, and there was so many different types. I grew up on 2000 AD, just read.
Me too.
We talked. I think Howard's talked about like the old Commando series and Battlefront and stuff like that.
I think that there is a danger with an over sanitization, or rather overprotectiveness of fiction aimed at children. In my opinion, and I was also an enormous 2000 AD reader, it was that edgy and controversial nature that it was something secret. It was like, my parents don't realize that people are getting shot in the face in this comic. It was that I absolutely loved. And while, sure, that's controversial, it drove me to read. It drove me to be interested in various forms of art. It drove me to have those quiet moments to think and enjoy something artistic and creative. And so, if you're going to ultra sanitize everything, there are many comics. I would specifically things like, I've had some old 60s and 70s American horror comics in the shop. And, I'm not going to say they're 18 rated or anything, but they are certainly more edgy and relatively shocking. And it's that, and you take that away, what young person's going to be interested in that? It's got to feel exciting. And feeling those it felt slightly underground. It's slightly like, oh, wow, this is actually quite shocking. Or in 2000 AD, intellectually challenging. There were so many concepts in that. 5 different stories in each comic, and every single one had some hugely creative, thought-provoking, political or, whatever reasoning or meaning behind it. And I just don't think that is there now. I can't think of I can't think of a British comic that is attempting anything like that. Unfortunately, I'm not an expert with what 2000 AD is doing now, but I just think there was a changing of the guard, and a lot of the old school guys, John Wagner and all those guys, sadly moved on. And I'm not sure that the next generation, I don't know what's happened, if they've been told to tone it down, or I'm not sure, but it just doesn't have the same level of excitement and unpredictability that it did have. I just genuinely didn't know what I was going to get. Nemesis the Warlock. Anyone that ever read Nemesis, it's absolutely wild. Your protagonist's like a chaos-loving alien, and your villain is like a horrible human. It's just brilliant. It flipped everything on its head. And for me, in terms of war comics, I don't know if you guys are aware of what was it called? There was a Western Front strip. It wasn't in 2008. It might have been in Battle, where it was from the Germans' point of view, and it was portrayed as exactly the same as if they were the British guys. And that probably hit me when I was about 10 years old. Genuinely made me go, right, hang on a minute. I've been sold a lie here. We're all just normal people, and it's the ones at the top that are doing this, right? And of having, at 10, to suddenly realize that, of course, they're all shit as well, right? Of course they are. It's just, we're all humans, right? Those were the concepts that were challenging and exciting and interesting. And I'm not sure whether it's all money, right? I'm not sure that anyone's prepared to take a risk anymore. And can you get away with it? Will it get banned? Will it get stopped from releasing it? And if that's the legislation, I don't know. We've got to think about that, right? Got to protect young people, sure, but at the same time, I don't know, not too much to the point that, I don't know, I loved horror stuff as a kid, influenced me in so many ways, and science fiction and all of that, it made me who I am. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'm not sure.
Howard, I wanted to reply to Ian's cultural point, but I'm conscious you've not had a chance to say much yet. Did you want to say anything so far? Or
Yeah, the first thing is listening to Ian, listen to his enthusiasm, his passion. Now, what I take out of this story is a story for most of us. I don't know whether it's a male thing, but it's certainly a human thing. That as children, you want to be entertained. So the first thing is entertainment. And you may not be fully versed in reading text, pure text. It can be a difficult medium, even learning it at 4 and 5. So a visual picture, we spend most of our life engaging with the environment using our visual senses more than our sight, our sound, touch, smell, other senses. That's just a fact. 80 to 85% of our sensory information that we react to is visual. There's lots of reasons for that, but that's how it is. So as kids, the chance to look at something without the need to know the words, to look at the pictures and form impressions and imagine, it means that medium is more likely to succeed. And then through time, you become engaged. And what I really love about the medium is, firstly, what it does is it engages. And if you're engaged, if your intention's being captured, you're going to follow the story and learn from it. That's something you and I, Mark, know, both as intelligence and information scientists, but also as teachers. You've got to engage before you can educate or challenge people's perceptions or allow them to develop their perceptions. And those early platforms, when I look back at my experience of the comics as a player, I was never an author. I was just a kid reading this stuff. It was, pardon the pun, pulp fiction. They were churning this stuff out, a bit like Warner Brothers cartoons, Looney Tunes, loads of the stuff. And their pressure was on churning it out, making it cheap and accessible. So they didn't have a lot of time to consider stories and themes episode by episode or book by book, but they did after a while start to build themes across versions. So you started basically with a diet of simple food, but it got more and more complex the more of it you ate because they introduced complexity. I loved that. But what it also did, it combined visual sense-making with written sense-making. There was a script, even though it wasn't visual. There would be notes put in, Joe dives off the cliff and there's a speech bubble saying this. So you were starting to get different forms of data allowing you to build the story. Again, making it digestible and therefore open. Move then into the written media, which was my teen years. A lot of the authors, although you might see a difference between the comic books, and I don't mean that in a derogatory fashion, versus text, the texts are just the same way. The great authors of my day in science fiction, I'm not talking about Edgar Allan Poe, people like that. I'm thinking of the Asimovs and the Robert Heinleins, Van Vogt, Larry Niven. These were my gods because I read them. And most of them, you could find them in the comic books as struggling authors, just trying to get one short piece, a couple of pages, planted in they're all anthologies. I've got hundreds of the blessed things. And a lot of the authors died on the vine. They might have had one good story in there, but they didn't have any continuity. But the good ones stayed, and eventually they became authors in their own right. And if you'd got the basic training, shall we say, of being engaged and entertained by this medium, from the comics, you could transpose that and educate yourself to take it into written text. Where I see a great difference, I always remember when 2001 Star Wars came out, two very separate and different films. But me as a science fiction enthusiast, I was really looking forward to these because up to then, most of the films had been, I always remember the ones around the 50s, like Them or King Kong or some kind of alien. You notice how all the aliens, when they come to Earth, they've all got 2 legs, 2 arms, a head with eyes, and they all speak English. Or they look like, I always remember The Thing, Carpenter's The Thing. That was great because it was really challenging about this thing that can morph into different things. It wasn't a human alien, this anthropological view of what something fictional should be. And when I got to the films the lesson of 2001 was the imagery. The lesson of Star Wars was the cowboy movie entertainment. People living in a weird, very actually human world. There could have been the same people fighting good and evil in the 50s or the 60s or in the world wars. The fact that they were flying around in spaceships was just a different environment. There was nothing really challenging in the story. It was a human story. But 2001 started to introduce concepts. And I have to say, since then, although there have been odd, what I consider to be great science fiction films, there's been a migration to the Marvel comic book style of, well, we'll go for CGI, we'll go for A-list entertainment, and a bit like you say, Ian, you get these people who are, well, we'll keep doing the same thing because it's safe. So you get the Fast and Furious franchise, the Marvel franchise, and you think, there's no real new story here. It's the same old people in a different scenario. I always liken it to, if you take the analogy of eating or consumption, junk food. We started out with simple ingredients back in the 40s and 50s and just put on a plate with any way that they could deliver it to you. Then it became a bit more sophisticated, and sometimes we got the quality restaurant, so the environment in which you got it as well as the product was really good. But now we've gone to the junk food where it's, you don't need to think, you don't need an imagination, we're going to do it all for you with CGI. I get more fun watching science fiction from the 60s with, I don't know, Fireball XL5, puppets on strings. It's laughable. Like Ian says, it tugs at my heartstrings for my childhood memories. So it has a different influence on me because I remember it first. It's like I like Pink Floyd. I've watched Pink Floyd have its crest and trough 3 times. Now my grandkids talk to me about Pink Floyd and I'm like, well, I was there first time round. Things have their day, like Ian says. But we've got that because certain things make you use your imagination more than others. I think they're the ones of real value. And that's where, for me, science fiction informed how I approached life and how I approached my professional world. As intelligence analysts, we collect data. And one of the things that we do, Ian, we use various fairly strict processes of logic and cognitive processes and critical thinking, all these kind of phrases. I won't bore you with them. But one of the things we've come up with is deductive versus inductive logic. And if you could produce an intelligence product that is fact A plus fact B equals that, you're totally safe because all you're doing is representing the facts. There's no imagination in it. There's no risk. Any buffoon could read those same facts and build the same 2-piece building block. But with inductive logic, you take fact A and fact B and you think, what if? So you start adding things in. The danger with that is it takes you into risk. What you're imagining might not be based in fact. And the further into risk you go, the more creative it is, but the less likely it is to be correct, which in our field, in law enforcement or business, that kind of reasoning to come up with theories and therefore decisions to take action can be quite a risky thing. But in your imagination, it's great. It's a wonderful tool to have. And that's what I think science fiction gave me as its contribution to my perspective.
I think you've touched on something quite significant there that's to do with a sense of identity. All of these things, nostalgia, in my opinion, and all of these things that are important to us, for the Falls or whatever, it was important to you as a young man. And that's to do with your sense of identity. These are formative things that go on to give us, maybe a code of morals, but certainly a sense of identity. And that is why Doctor Who is important for me. Fourth of the Falls is important for you. And whatever for Mark, I'm not sure. But, we've all, and that's what I'm dealing with nearly every day. My problem is being aware of different generations and it not just ending at when after my bit, it's all rubbish after that. And obviously it's not. Everybody's got their thing. And I always think about specifically Doctor Who because I hate to say it, but you do find that the older the person, the more negative they are about the show as it's gone on. So most old people that I meet that are just, it was rubbish after William Hartnell. Then you got, John Pertwee was best, rubbish after that. Tom Baker was the best, rubbish after that. Oh, I loved Sylvester McCoy. After that, it was all rubbish. So what that tells me is that you are into the character that you met when you were young. And that is your Doctor. And that can be extrapolated across so many different things. And that's why people get really upset about it. So if they change, like the recent Doctor Who, I really didn't like it. That's because it was the antithesis of what is Doctor Who to me. And that's why it upset me. And I think that's why it upset a lot of people. But the most vocal of us are my generation or, older people that, the people that loved it don't say a thing. And they're possibly the younger people out there that to them, where is the Doctor? And that's cool. You got to kind of remember that even though it might not be for me, it's not aimed at me. I'm 52 years old.
That really matters because if you think about it, one of the things that I always loved was I wasn't reading these comics or these books in a group session with other people. They weren't written with me in mind as an individual. They were written by people who wanted to do something that they thought, this might be fun. And I would read it. And if Mark had read it at the same time as me in the next house, he would have had a completely different imagination and outcome of looking at it. It's personal to each individual. And that's the thing. You can look and say, it doesn't matter. The whole point about the individuality is if you get 100 different versions, that's of value because that one product is stimulating 100 people 100 different ways. There'll be people have themes in common, and some will like things, and we all take different things from the food that we eat. We all take different things from the mediums that we use to stimulate our imagination. I always remember Androids Who Dream of Electric Sheep. I always found it a complicated book, but when the film came out, Blade Runner, suddenly I had a medium and a presentation of it that made sense and appealed to me. By contrast, there was one called The Forever War, a really clever concept, a book, Joe Haldeman, where two soldiers were flying around, and because they were flying to different planets, they were going through time dilation and distortion, and they end up splitting up, and then one of them ends up at the end. They want to get back together when they retire, a man and a woman. So one of them flies around a planet and round stars to kind of reverse time, so they come out in the same place. I loved the science of that. But then you get to the film, and it's these weird, it's like almost a caricature. So you've got all these big monsters jumping about and fancy American actors playing larger-than-life characters. It really was the worst kind of comic book. It didn't have any content. It was all visual pants. And I just thought, for me anyway, I mean, some people would have only seen the film and thought, brilliant, wouldn't have made the connection to the book. But for me, it had lost it. Now, maybe that's my age calling. Separate thing, I build motorbikes, classic motorbikes. I'm too young for British bikes. I build old Japanese of one make, and I started late 60s, early 70s. So that's what I'm into. I build them, love them, but over the years, they've just hit a point where they're becoming worthless. Reason being, I'm 68, the people of my generation who were into them as teenagers, as young men, are no longer young men, they're dead or dying. And we have to accept that everything is of its time, and if it doesn't evolve, it dies.
I hate to say it, but I deal with it all the time, and particularly in my little niche, because sometimes people can hold on to things for too long, and they drop out of fashion for exactly that reason. The example I'll give you would be Eagle comic.
Wow,
Dan Dare, right?
Dan Dare.
Super cool, right? Dan Dare, Frank Hampson artwork, super cool. I can tell you that last year, I ended up acquiring an enormous quantity from number 2, so the 50s stuff, all the way through, 400, 500 issues of it. And I can tell you they sold for less than £1 each, and as a lot. And they're just not sought after because that generation, as you say, is coming to an end. I hate to say it, but it's particularly Jerry Anderson, you notice it. So at the moment, still big numbers on things like UFO, Space 1999, because he's still got that end of that era. But stuff like Supercar, Four Feather Falls, all that, it's gone. So it's such a strange thing. Occasionally you'll get people that are like into the history of it, but the days of people remembering watching Four Feather Falls. It
wasn't a personal experience for them.
I mean, that's a long time ago, right? So, but things that come back, so, sort of touching on things like the Marvel films now, and I totally see what you're saying, and I have to say, some can be quite generic. However, I'm of the generation where I was reading Marvel UK comics as a kid, and it was all black and white, but every single moment, I'm like, why is no one making films of this stuff? I'm 52. My generation is now effectively running the Hollywood, and that's what we've got 26 movies later. They're doing what I wanted to do. So for me, seeing the Hulk on screen brings a tear to my eye. I don't really care. I get quite emotional about it because I'm like, this is what I've always wanted to see.
But that's the individual experience. It doesn't make either of us wrong or right. It's just a phenomenon of human life. And the thing for Mark and I, where that applies, I take the skill set that I think, or the awareness and that science fiction gave me and science fantasy to give me this skill to, as Star Wars would say, go beyond, seek new forms of data and any new kind of interesting information. Even if if after looking at it, I think it's not great, I've got to keep that open mind, because as a professional, if I don't, like you with your business, if you stuck to Eagle Comics and they're no longer a viable business option, your business will die. So if you don't learn to pick up on whether it be manga or whatever, I don't know the world, your business would die. We're the same in Intel. You know, the techniques that I used when I first started in Intel, pre-computers. You try and find out information about people without Google or the internet or their social media or phones. What? How did you do that? You know, as a child, I'd never been to the West. I had family involved in World War II, and I was a child of post-World War II, but I wasn't involved directly or personally. So those comic books gave me access to a world that I was never going to see. So I had to imagine it. And I just think that's such a valuable lesson for all of us to keep looking for other options. I'd ask you something. This is what I raised with Mark. This is how I think of it. I trained as a scientist before I joined the police. So I very much give me the facts and I'll work on that. And police work is kind of that. You've got to produce the facts in evidence. You can't just guess. But one of the things for me was the science fiction that I enjoyed were the likes of Larry Niven, Joe Haldeman. So you've got Ringworld or Haldeman's Future Worlds or Asimov's Robot Rules. They were taking the rules of science and applying them. So, you know, I'm going to design a ship, a planet, basically, the tube that is Ringworld, floating around in, but they came from scientific background. They were like scientists writing, or ex-military like Robert Heinlein. But then on the other side, so there was a basis in fact. They were sort of going a bit beyond the facts, putting the facts into a different environment. On the other side of the equation was the total, what I would call, fantasy world. So you've got the weirdest possible aliens. They usually ended up, you know, you'd see in the comic the drawing of the gorgeous woman draped over the King Kong or the alien or whatever. There was that kind of sexualization to titivate it, and that's fine. That's just entertainment. But fantasy, it had zero basis or very little basis in fact. And you think, well, that's no good to me. And I always drew like a bell curve between the two. So at one end, it's science-based, you know, science plus. The other end, it's total fantasy. Somewhere between the two, they meet. I think there's a place for both. I've had my best insights in the science fantasy world in my workplace and my personal life, where you really go out there on a limb and look at something that really challenges you. And then you try and work back to find some kind of place in fact where it might have a relevance, rather than starting with science and just going a little bit beyond the envelope. Does that kind of any links to anything for you or you, Mark?
That just makes me think of, I remember reading about, I think I'm right in saying that it was R.C. Clarke that wrote 2001, wasn't it? Yeah, he was kind of in with NASA at the time.
He was a scientist. Yeah.
He was a scientist. And there's a moment, I remember reading 2001 many years ago, and there is a moment in that where he's sitting in the dock and he opens up what is effectively hand touch Windows screens. And he wrote it in 1960, whatever.
Exactly.
Wow. Amazing that they knew that. Well, science imitating art, imitating science, right? Yeah. Fascinating. I think that's incredible.
I think we've covered so many things, but I want to try and crystallize some really important things that you've both said, because I think what we're kind of circling around is we've got science fiction as a genre. That's important. We've got comics as a medium. That's important. I'm going to start with comics, and then we can go into the sci-fi bit in a bit. I think because I want to pick up something you said, Ian, about the battle comic strip from the German perspective, and as a Brit, you suddenly go, "Oh, hang on,
yeah,
we the baddies." It's that meme, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Suddenly that instant cognitive switch is kind of crazy, right? Because I think, and Howard's example of saying, there's a guy called J.P. Rangaswamy. He did a TED Talk years ago, basically introducing this idea that information, not literally, but information can be like food, as an analogy. So basically, you can have fast food that's rapid, easy to digest. It's easy to watch. There's another guy called Slavoj Zizek that says that the reason why we invented the laugh track was essentially we're all so tired that we want people to do our laughing for us when we're watching these shows. I think there's this idea that there's this fast medium, but comics are the reverse of that. comics are slow, but I think we talked about the comics as kids. Absolutely. Reading and some personal private exploration space as children. I think kids are far brighter than we think they are, right? And your point about the kind of, the itchy and scratchy violence. And yes, since the 2000s, we've taken out the guns, we've taken out the hammers and the guillotines and the anvils. There was some research in the 60s, and the scientist just popped out of my head. But if you Google Bobo the Clown, it's this video footage of this clown inflatable. Toddler A punches it, toddler B emulates toddler A. That's why we can't have violence on TV, because that's really, really bad. But I think the research is that show now that actually when you have it in certain contexts, actually it's an empathy tool. You can actually, and I think that there's reasons to maybe go into that. So I think, but to go back to comics as food, comics are slow. And this is a very strange concept to try to get across, but imagine us as kids, and imagine instead of Howard, you getting the books or comics or the radio, and same for you, imagine if somebody gave us a tablet with Netflix only. You know what I mean? Even if it was age appropriate, right? Parental controls, that's fine. You've got Bluey or Bob the Builder or Thomas the Tank, whatever. But imagine we just had, and wonder what type of people we would be if we only ever processed, if we just had the tablet from 5+. And I think that my suspicion is, and I don't have much evidence to support this, my suspicion is that with the generations pre-2000s, I'm going to arbitrarily call it the pre-iPad generation, is that I think that our imaginations were our source of entertainment. And that's not to say that they were better or worse, but I think there were perhaps benefits. It's a bit like, I don't know if I know it's kind of a Hollywood trope, isn't it? The parent reading to the child. But I think kids need a jumping on point. They need a handrail, right? Now, I could be quite bold and say, do you know what? Let's just give kids Shakespeare. We'll give them the complete works of Shakespeare. It's one of the best culture we've ever had. All of humanity's in there. No kid's going to read Shakespeare. And at what age are they going to get into it? They need somewhere to get up, to kind of climb up that ladder to get something interesting. I came across Shakespeare because of my interest in Star Trek. There were some Star Trek episodes that made plenty of what I later learned to be, absolutely, Shakespeare quotes. I'm thinking, actually, there's something in this. Now, could I have processed Shakespeare in my pre-teens, early teens? No. Because I didn't have the life experience and I probably wouldn't get into it. And I rejected it. And your point about counterculture is really important because you're right. Comics is counterculture. That's gone, right? We don't have, counterculture in general has gone.
In
music.
This country.
Yes, in this country. Sorry, forgive me. Yes, in this country, it's all been corporatized, right? So, yeah. So I think something to be said for getting kids to read comics and graphic novels, but I also think it's healthy for adults, right? I think we've not had a chance to go through it into the podcast yet, but we are going to look at screen time and visual processing, as Howard alluded to. But I think let's take us to science fiction then, because I think the other thing that both of you said that was really important was science fiction is like a lever. There was a guy a few years ago, Darko Suvin. I don't know if you've heard of him. He was kind of Suvin. He was like a Eastern European, I think it was Yugoslavian philosopher. Basically said that the cool thing about sci-fi is it causes something called cognitive estrangement. Basically, it gets something familiar, puts it with something unfamiliar, and gets you to kind of play with it. He called it making the familiar strange. The idea that you can kind of get a human problem like, a flood or a famine or something like that, but put it on an alien planet or put it on a space station. Do something so you've got a jumping on point where you've got some things you recognize, but you've got some things that you don't. He also introduced an idea of something called the novum, Novum. Basically a novel idea which doesn't have any analog or historical precedent. Your brain's got to really chew it over and think, what? Okay, how does that work? So, like Terry Pratchett at The Eighth Colour or something like that. Something really bizarre that's so out there that, and I think it was Lovecraft, wasn't it? Very good at kind of like really weird stuff, just on the fringe. You kind of think, so I'm not decrying other genres. Genres are important. But I guess the broader point I'm making is that you, I, and Howard were all very lucky that we had this kind of confluence, this kind of like alignment of planets of genre, medium, and at the time. And I think that sometimes, and what you said, Ian, about being people at various ages complain. I complain about current media. I think a lot of the current media is rubbish, blah, blah, blah. And there is some validity in what you're saying. Say, we're just not that age. Yes, there is. But I also wonder if some of the medium and the content itself isn't as good as it used to be. And we haven't raised our kids to process it in the right way because, to be frank, we give them an iPad when they were 5 and said, good luck, God bless. And I think there might be something to that.
Yeah. I think that's possibly an error. I don't know. It's so difficult. We're such an adaptive species. I mean, I don't know. It's so difficult. It's so difficult to kind of get caught with the blinkers of your own generation, if you get me, and be negative of others, or not negative, but somehow, it's not as good as it was. I think that is such an easy trap to fall into. I don't know. I don't think we know yet, do we? I think we will know in about 20 years' time whether that whole generation is a total mess. I think they've got bigger problems. I think the fact that there's a whole generation of kids that, because of COVID, never went in a shop, never bought a pint of milk, don't know how to talk to people, don't know what money is. That's a big problem, right? No one's worrying about that. I don't know. I think, for me, yes, too much screen time is a problem. The nature of, for me, the comics, to connect to comics or science fiction, while it was a singular experience, and it was like, there was this thing that no one else knew about, it was that, but it was also that actually there was a secret world in which grown-ups were writing crazy level stuff, sci-fi, comic books, whatever, and that was a thing, and that was actually people out there like me, right? Whatever it was, if it was I used to love like the Pan Book of Horrors, right? Do you remember those? Right. Trash, right? But there was like, Victorian and later authors and things that I would have never read, but because it had got a skull on the cover, I was like, cool. But the fact that they were out there, I didn't see anyone else reading them, but I knew that there were other people, A, that wrote this stuff, and B, that they must have been popular because they were everywhere. And for me, that was reassuring. I mean, I grew up in like a tiny village in the middle of Derbyshire, there weren't other people my age in my village. I had to walk 3.5 miles to my friend's house every weekend. That's what I did. And so, having those moments.
You're not going to meet many cowboys or aliens in Derbyshire anymore than you are in Yorkshire.
Aliens than anything else.
Exactly.
No, it just wasn't people around. So for me, the sci-fi comic book thing was massive because it was my own world, but it also connected me to a broader intellectual kind of reality. Was that
there's a generic lesson, and it's not about better or worse. It teaches you to be aware and alert that there are other points of view and other perspectives. And it's kind of learning to multitask and think about things in different ways. And that's pan-generational. I mean, I know what you mean about, the old days were the best. I don't think it's quite like that, but I get it with something as stupid as Tom and Jerry, those cartoons. I loved those as a kid. The Hanna-Barbera stuff, some of it, by the time you got to the Scooby-Doos, it's like, but what the heck? But look at the revisited Tom and Jerry's. They are, in terms of their digitization, beautiful. They aren't as clunky or as seam-filled, or they certainly don't have the inappropriate characters like the black housekeeping lady who goes around with you only ever see her legs and her pettiskirts and the pan when she's braying Tom or whatever. Those kind of their day tropes, shall we say, that we wouldn't condone these days or would be shocked to see. They were of their time. Like you said, the stories were better crafted. They made more subtle points or more outlandish points without the fear that people would take it to heart and think, I'm going to go out and get my cat to beat up a mouse or the dog to beat up how stupid is this? Or Roadrunner and that kind of thing. But I think what it does, it gives you a perspective to say, I've seen the versions and I've seen them evolve. So it's maybe a more mature perspective. And it's not to say one's better, but I wonder how many of the people who are coming to these worlds as young people right now even are aware, because it's not in current media's interests to say, do you realise this has a history and there's a life plan that brought it to this point through these other media and these other platforms. Because if you go there, you're not spending time or money with them. Mm-hmm. I wonder how many of today's people, potential audiences, have the intellect or easily access, and they're used to easy access today, to be able to think, I'm going to go back and look at it in a more difficult medium. If it's a current, like you say, the Marvel films, I really enjoyed that, but I'm going to go back and look at it, the books, in the comics and see where it came from. And you may find you like that or see something different. You may not. But for me, the awareness matters, and that's something that only maturity can give. Don't make it right and wrong, but if you can see that lifeline, shall we say, timescale or change over time, evolution, that also tells you need to keep watching it evolve, that even what we're looking at now, that the kids of today and young people of today are looking at, is just a stage on a journey. I agree with Mark. The big worry, regardless of the topic or the theme or the medium, what worries me is the more we rely on IT-generated products, the more we get, shall we say, spoon-fed our intellect and our imagination. And the other thing is the dopamine hit. We're doing this because it gives us pleasure, the same way as you eat inappropriate foods, junk foods or whatever. They are using subtle tricks to give you chemical and other signals, pleasure in the brain. Nothing wrong with that. We're fairly predictable monkeys at the end of the day. We're biological creatures, so we're open to shove the square food in the square hole, and it gives you the tick box of that was nice, be it healthy or not. But when you think about that process, by taking away our imagination and making us reliant completely on these products, and the next one in IT terms is AI. We now have AI generated. This is not human beings' imagination drawing things. It's AI redrawing things based on what other humans before them managed. I mean, we're not yet at the stage of wholly conceived stuff. I'm really enjoying at the moment some of the people who are just visualizing new worlds where they have it's their model, but they put it into AI and AI generates the image. And some of them are jaw-dropping, and you think, wow, I could imagine, look at this. It sparks my imagination. But I wonder where we go once the human element of that goes and it's purely artificial. You're then in a virtual world.
Including fiction in itself.
Yeah, it's kind of gone full circle.
Very Asimov, isn't it? That we've created art, creating art, and you can make it up, right?
We are no longer, at what point does AI become its own customer for its own product and we're superfluous? But anyway, that's Howard philosophizing as an old fellow.
I totally agree. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? It's one of those, I totally agree with you, but at the same time, if we're ever going to cure cancer or find alien life, it's probably AI that's going to do it. So I would argue, unfortunately, while it has its downside, it also has this potential for a completely species-changing knowledge and awareness. And so, we just have to manage it somehow. It's a really weird one, AI. I mean, obviously, I know a couple of comic artists, and I'm obviously I profit from the talent of others. I live off selling.
We all do. Even the people who are the customers who read it.
But I think, the AI thing will, for me, I see, what's it called? Conceptual art has been a thing for a long time, right? I don't really see AI as being any different from conceptual art. What I think is important is the credit towards the creators that have been referenced within AI, and there needs to be a system developed for how that works, because, it's just not right that you can produce something that's based on, I don't know, Brian Bolland's artwork and it look exactly the same and then get no credit. That's not right.
Yeah, I agree.
But I would say, the one thing I would say that's positive about it is that I suspect very low budget creatives will have a medium to be able to create something truly special with zero money. And to me, that is a really exciting thing, because I seem to enjoy more art that comes from a hard place than I do art that comes from multi-billionaires, right? That's just me. But I think it forces more creativity. It forces more inventiveness. And so for me, people creating, I'm starting to see, short AI films and things created purely within that. And while on one level, it's kind of terrifying, on another level, I hope it prompts artists that already exist to be more creative and to take their creativity into a place that AI cannot do, because it's something new, and that's nothing that we've not seen before. But I also hope it allows creators that are working on a zero budget to be able to do something interesting and different and thought-provoking and use the technology for surely the benefit of mankind.
That's what I like. Unlike the Hollywood sort of the Marvel comic, big commerce,
right?
production system that is the behemoth that it is, and it's all about big money. What I love about the AI is it allows this it's almost going back full circle to the comic book, when anybody with a small budget but loads of imagination can use the tool to generate something. It might be good, it might be crap, but it's not being expensive. It's risk-free in terms of investment. It doesn't have to have a business benefit. And
isn't it wild
the other thing is,
isn't it, at the moment?
its true value is tested purely by the number of people who click on it and like it or share it or subscribe. And I don't mean subscribing in a money way by paying a fee. I know there might be business benefits for the producers down the line, but you know what I mean? It's not purely reliant upon earning money. Sorry, Matt.
No, just I want to pick up something that Ian said, because first of all, I think you're far too humble when you just describe yourself in terms of you just run the shop. You are very active in the community. You're massive online. You're a curator of sorts. I think you've brought a lot of your art history stuff along with you, because you do make sure this stuff survives. I've talked to you in your shop where there's the stuff that isn't for sale that you're kind of like, it's almost like a museum. You're looking after it in a way.
That's just thinking I am about.
But I think that's important though, because I think there is both a threat and an opportunity. Howard and I are not anti-AI. We're really not. What we're anti is when we gain something, it's what do we lose? And so let me try and explain by an example. Let me try and use a crude analogy. One of the things that's cool about the internet is, regardless of our generations, we can share music with each other, and the music quality and music experience is pretty similar. I mean, if I'm showing you a record from 40s bluegrass to 60s this, 80s that, and I see young generation, it makes me smile when I see generations walking down the street with, like, you know, Nirvana shirts, or, you know what I mean? It's like, and they've just discovered it. And I think I wish I could be that age again. I wish I could, you know, AC/DC or whatever. So, do you know what I mean? I wish I could be that. So it's cool that they get to listen to these crisp audio, and they get access to the entire catalogue. They don't have to wait. That bit's awesome.
Yeah.
But here's the thing though, right? I think you can do that with music. I don't think you could do it as easy with comics or that type of medium, because I think the problem is you've got the cognitive load you have to either watch a program. I mean, Pony, our producer, I'm always on him and saying, watch more TV, watch more movies. And he's just not into it. And that's fair enough. That's just his generation. He's just not into it. But I wonder how much have we lost between we can't get people to read the stuff. And I think, but where your point about AI, I agree with you. I think AI will give people who can't draw so much, because to me right now in the AI community, I don't know if you've seen online, you've probably similar experiences. There's quite an anti-AI art thing.
Yeah.
Like you're not an artist.
Especially in my world.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I actually think it all comes down to fabrication. So I'm sorry, if I can have an idea and I can ask this prompt generation. Yeah, obviously, if I'm completely talentless and I'm just lazy, but I think humans recognize lazy work, right? But I think we can recognize quality work as well. But if somebody can labor over a prompt rather than labor over a pen or a paintbrush and come out with some cool content, I see no difference. I actually think that's pretty damn good, to be honest. And I think that's the other thing. That's the good thing for comics is that I think, and you alluded to earlier on, for a comic to be good story, good art, good publication medium, there's a lot of planets that have to align, right, to get that right.
Yeah.
But at least AI. So if you know, we may have had loads of it. I suspect we all had ideas for our own stories as kids or teenagers growing up. I can't draw at all.
No, I mean,
and I have many artist friends who sat down with me for hours saying, they've started off by saying, anyone can draw. And it's like, no, Mark, you can't draw. You can't draw. But I have ideas. So if I can use AI to get there, and I think it's exciting times. But I think this is why your work's really important. I think it's really important for people who, Howard's mentioned a few older content pieces as well. I think there's a duty on us to kind of catalogue and make available as much of the old content as we can as a source of inspiration, because that's our way of, we can't give you the same experience we had. Howard, you grew up in a generation, I grew up in a different generation. I can't ask young people to do that. What we can do is we can tell them about these characters and maybe make them accessible. Like I'm a massive fan of your shorts. Your shorts on YouTube, you got there with the comic. It's like bright, colourful. You bring the kind of character to life. You might do a quick synopsis. That is an act of curation. And you kind of think it's things like that stop characters and stories just dropping out of consciousness, like society's consciousness. And I think that helps And unfortunately, we get it in intelligence. In intelligence, you'll provide a piece of intelligence to somebody, and 5 years later, it might solve a crime or stop a bad thing from happening. And we'll never know. Nobody will come back to us and say, as Intel staff, do you know that work you did 5 years ago? Well, actually, it led to this big thing. It's this counterfactual. We know it happens. We've got some documented cases of it, but we very rarely get the nod to say, you led to that. It just doesn't happen. But I think the same says for you and what you do with sci-fi and fantasy is that I have no doubt there are people of different generations looking at your content and actually going, oh wow, that's a really cool character. I'm just going to have a little sketch. Or I'm going to talk to the prompt engineer. I'm going to do something with it. So I think it's really important for all of us that now that sci-fi is more, I would say, more socially acceptable. Right, the internet has now made it a lot less niche. We could be a little less embarrassed about our sci-fi interests. Maybe we've got a duty to
the earth.
Absolutely.
One thing that I would ask Ian, we all have a journey in life, and that's what makes us the people we are and teaches the lessons that we value. You've had your unique journey through these medium to where you are now with other stuff alongside, but this is, I suspect, a constant theme throughout your life, regardless of how you were making a living or what domestically was going on. Something that gives you pleasure. So you always go back to that. If there was one lesson, one thing that journey had taught you in terms of your love of this genre and medium, what would it be?
I would say that regardless of external pressure, however you think your family or your loved ones or people, what they think about you, you might think they all want you to be a doctor or a surgeon or an astronaut. But what they actually want for you is to be happy. And therefore, I would say, if you can, pursue your dreams. That would be the one thing. Now, a lot of people aren't in that situation, but I would say, take risks. You're only alive once. In the blink of an eye, we'll all be old men and it will have passed us by. So you've got to take chances. And if you don't, then you've got to be happy with that. But don't be frustrated at the end of your life if you look back, you think, you know what? I wish I'd have dropped that rubbish job and I wish I'd have just gone and done. Because at the end of the day, you can't take anything with you. You're only here for a little bit. Your family will love you, whatever you do, whatever mistakes you make in life. So pursue your dreams and be happy in that way, because that is more important than anything. Because regardless of what anything else happens, history, future, whatever, you're only here for the blink of an eye, and therefore enjoy it, because nothing else matters. So, live your dream if you can. That's what I would say. And do what you love and not what you think you should be doing because, you feel under societal pressure to live this way or live that way. It doesn't matter. What matters is being happy. And that's what I would say.
Ian, I think that's an absolutely perfect place to wrap things up. I'm hoping you maybe might consider coming back in the future. I think we've probably got more things to talk about, but I think we've Is there if people want to learn about the shop, do you just want to give the shop name and address or the rough location, or do you want to give your web address as well?
Thank you. The shop is Collector's Corner, and I am located at 33 St John's Street in the town of Wirksworth in Derbyshire. And on TikTok, I am Dalek Zen, who is my shed-built Dalek, who is my head of security. I am Collector's Corner on Facebook, but there are several Collector's Corners. There is a picture, I think, also of my red shed-built Dalek on my Facebook page. I'm on YouTube, Collector's Corner, and I'm on Instagram. I've just managed to gain access after 2 years of being hacked and gain access to my Instagram, and I'm Second-Hand Geekery on Instagram.
Wow. I can't thank you enough for today. I thank you for
I'm sorry
putting up with my strange requests and strange ideas, but it's actually worked out really well. I thought it's super well. Yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this one comes out. So I hope you come back again. So all the best, and we'll call it there then. So see you later.
Thank you so
Take
much,
care.
It's really nice to see you guys.
Enjoyed it, Ian. Great to meet you. Have a great weekend.
Pleasure to you.
Good work.